Welcome to the Startup Competitors podcast, where we talk with early-stage entrepreneurs to understand what information they use to inform product roadmap, strategy, and market differentiation.
Welcome to the Startup Competitors podcast. Today we're sitting down with Brian Powers from PactSafe. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right, why don't we start off with a quick overview of PactSafe and what you guys do?
Sure. So we are a SaaS platform that makes contracts seamless and frictionless to other business processes. So a couple ways that manifests itself in the real world. We have companies like TiVo and Upwork where our API is plugged in behind their marketplaces, their checkout flows online, and the little check boxes that you see where you accept terms and conditions, privacy policies. We are behind the scenes tracking those, creating workflow behind them, making sure that anything you want to or expect to do with a more traditional contract, you can do with these types of contracts at scale. And then the other primary use case of PactSafe is taking that the similar concept of making a contract seamless to that type of process and applying it in other contexts. So for more traditional contracts, one way that works, contact centers use PactSafe to inject contract acceptance into a phone call by sending out a text, and somebody types, "I agree" in response to the text, and now you have a contract. So yeah, that's basically what we do.
Awesome. For somebody who's listening who wants to maybe understand where you guys are in the journey, can you paint a picture of kind of how big you guys are, key customers, any kind of vanity metrics that would help somebody understand where PactSafe is?
Sure. So we've been around for about 3 years, 14 employees. We've done some of our customers, in addition to the ones that I mentioned, would include like CDW, Angie's List. I don't know. The list goes on and on. Lots of e-commerce and SaaS companies. That's primarily what we serve. And then a lot of mid-market tech-centric companies. In terms of some business metrics, we just closed a $5.5 million Series A funding round. So it's expecting to grow quite a bit over the next 12 months due to that. We've processed just over 42 million agreement acceptances.
Are you kidding me?
No.
All right, that's a kick-ass stat.
Yeah, scale gets up there when you're doing lots of check boxes and people are clicking buttons. The numbers add up.
Crap, man, that's awesome.
Yeah. So I don't even know how many API calls we've done, but it's a lot more than that. We have about 150 customers. We have, I think it's almost 100,000 different individuals and entities have accepted contracts inside of PactSafe. And then obviously a lot of that, when you're talking about the type of contract that we deal with, sometimes a single signer might accept something, multiple times online. So the API is used a lot.
And nobody knows they're using PactSafe, right? Like if I'm buying something on CDW, if I'm like, you're invisible behind the scenes, correct?
For the most part, yeah. Sometimes you'll see, like if you go to some of our customers, you'll see a little powered by PactSafe, maybe at the bottom of one of our online legal centers, but we leave that up to them. Obviously, we love it when they co-brand, but They don't then all do that.
Got it. All right, awesome. Thanks for that. Let's start with maybe talking about who you guys view as competition. So when you think of competitors for PactSafe, classically, who do you envision?
So it's interesting the way we think about that. If you go back to the way I split up kind of how what we do manifests itself in the real world.
Yeah.
For that first use case where we're tracking and we're the workflow engine and API behind all these massive scale click-through agreements, we don't have competition. We're the only API in the world that does that. And we have all sorts of theories on why we're the only ones to do that. But it's a specialized combination of legal and technical acumen that was required to not only come up with the idea, but build something like that. And then on the other side is that is we take this concept of seamless, frictionless contracting at scale and try to apply it to more traditional contract use cases. That's where we get into some of the competitive sets that include e-signature providers, contract management, digital transaction management, all sorts of different names for the different competitive sets that we get into.
Well, okay, so that's interesting. So when you think of product roadmap, do you think of it as two products? Do you think of it as, we've got our main business, which is the thousands, hundreds of thousands of transactions for click-throughs and things like that, and then we've got this other more emerging set of business that we want to grab more of? Or do you think of it as one platform? Like, when you guys think through the product roadmap, how are you guys managing that?
So we think about it as one platform, but the value proposition of that platform to different businesses is much different. So, it's a huge product marketing exercise for us as a small company to kind of process and think through that, both in terms of how we manage the roadmap and in terms of how we, sell, market, and price the product. What's interesting is, the massive scale side of what we do, the click-through contracting API. Most of the product roadmap there is driven by very proactive, innovative stuff where, we want to lead our customers down a path of innovation. And we've already done that by getting them to adopt the product because nobody else does it.
Right.
Whereas a lot of the product roadmap on the things that we do that are, have an overlap in some competitive sets, a lot of that roadmap can be reactive to prior expectations that customers have. So when you're plugging in to do something that in the absence of PactSafe, for example, our customers that are doing this massive scale click-through stuff, they had nothing. There was no dashboard where they could see who had accepted what. There was no way for them to update those terms in a timely fashion. No way to do any of that at scale. And so when they start using PactSafe, they're very happy. They really don't have much product input or feedback at all. Besides, this is great. Without this, we had nothing.
Right.
We had, we'd have to ask engineering to update a typo in our terms, and it would take 6 weeks. Or, we had to ask engineering to pull a bunch of data to prove that, 1,000 people accepted our terms 2 years ago, and it would take months. And now they have something that does that with by pushing a button. Whereas, when somebody adopts PactSafe to say, well, we want to send out all of our high velocity sales contracts with your platform.
What's a high velocity sales contract?
Something they want to get signed and back very fast. So I guess that's really every sales contract, right? But a lot of our big customers, there's an understanding that certain things they sell are going to be negotiated, redlined, and go through legal and all that. Where these are, okay, well, we have a whole set of products that we just want something to go out.
The $5 swipe the credit card, we're done.
Yeah,
got it.
Yeah, so a lot of our customers use the term high velocity contracts.
Okay.
So it's a big focus of what we do. And sometimes that's NDAs, sometimes it's other more standardized, very lightly negotiated types of contracts, not just sales contracts. But when they're using it for a use case like that, there's an expectation of what it should do, how it should work, how it should feel. And that's usually based on them using an electronic signature provider software or some sort of contract management software. And so a lot of our product roadmap is reactive in that sense, that there's already market expectations as to how those things should work. Even though, for some of those things where people are sending something out for click to accept on mobile or something like that from a Salesforce integration, nobody else is doing that, but they still are thinking about it as I'm sending a contract out to get signed. It's just happening faster in a different way. So that's where some of our roadmap planning gets into, customer expectations. And a lot of those customer expectations are driven by what competitive products are doing.
When you look at the click-through, the more scalable side of the business, the click-through API, so you don't have a competitive set that you look at there necessarily, right? Other people in the space doing it. Where do you guys draw inspiration? So I'm sure you're still looking around at the market to see what other companies are doing, new technologies that are hitting the scene. And I know I'm hitting you out of left field with this, but is there anybody who comes to mind that, like, we watch what Amazon is doing? We watch what, insert company here. Like just to, maybe they're not going to be doing what we're doing, but we can infer from where they're going that maybe that's a place we should be at some point in the future, or whatever the case may be.
So there's a couple ways that we do that. One, obviously, and the way we really innovate, draw a lot of our inspiration for innovation is talking to our customers. And even for the click-through API side of things, if we go and we proactively ask them, and sometimes they're leading questions or whatever, but trying to figure out, what are the other ways that we can make the product better. But in terms of, there are some companies out there that, they've built backends that are at least pretty good from what we can tell at what PactSafe does. So one company that comes to mind is Airbnb. Always been a big fan of the way they present their click-through agreements. And you can tell from the outside looking in that they're doing a lot of this stuff the right way. I mean, we have no idea how they're managing this stuff on the back end, but you can see it the way they present it, the transparency they give to people, the way they make sure that people are scrolling through things and checking the right boxes and all of that stuff. And, there's a whole bunch of businesses out there that, they're in a very, very compliance driven, high risk, high volume business model.
Right.
Where, they made the decision early on to make sure they were doing this stuff the right way. Now they're still going to have some pain points behind the scenes because legal, who usually dictates how this stuff works, never has enough sway over a roadmap. And that's probably the way it's going to be forever. But it's always kind of is we're looking to try to enhance what we provide to our massive scale click-through customers. It's always good to look out and see, who's doing what and gleaning best practices that way. Because I'm a lawyer and a lot of what we do is driven by, what makes that type of contracting binding and enforceable. You can also glean a lot of best practices from case law. So, every time Uber loses a case, we'll go read it and we'll extract some things that they've done wrong and we'll make it right.
Sounds awful.
It can be awful. That's why I still do it. Right. Because nobody else will do it. But it's also a nice barrier of entry, right?
Yeah, for sure.
We know most tech companies aren't going to go out there and
read case law
and read all that. Correct. And then pull the files that aren't publicly accessible so you can see screenshots of all that stuff. And so that's part of it as well. And then the other side of it is for that use case, we really have to try to think 5 steps ahead of everyone. So there's a lot of stuff that we do with our platform that still, nobody in the legal community is even thinking about yet. What's thought of as really traditional contracting workflow into that process. How can we continue to do that and anticipate, what our customers are going to need in 1-2 years? There's a reason we're the only people out there doing it, right? And so, we want to continue to stay ahead. So that's sitting down with key people on the team and thinking, how can we make this better? Like, let's really think 5 steps ahead, 5 years ahead, and figure out, work our way backwards to make sure that, we're really innovating.
How often would you say you guys do that? Have those types of conversations? Is that a planned thing? Does it happen a little bit more ad hoc?
So up until recently, it was ad hoc. Now there's 3 of us that sit down twice a week or every other week on Tuesday for 3 hours. And that's where we do roadmap planning. And that's where, we figure out, okay, well, it is a small startup. And especially as we shifted and started getting some of the business that was more competitive, a lot of our roadmaps started getting dominated by things that customers wanted to make us, because of those prior expectations that they already had. So, we've really tried to work. And the nice thing about, closing the funding round is now we'll scale up that part of our business so that we can make a concerted effort that, the innovative side of our roadmap doesn't get left behind, because it's really easy to do when you're trying to meet customer expectations.
Right. So this has been hinted at. You've said it a couple of times, but we didn't say it explicitly. You are a lawyer. Which is part of the background that makes this magic work. You're still a relatively small company, so this is probably an unfair question, but it's something that just occurred to me while you're talking. Your unique background as a lawyer and obviously understand technology, not just from this company, but the type of lawyer you were before this. You engaged with a ton of tech companies. So you're kind of uniquely positioned to do some of that work, like read Uber case law. And I'm sure Turo's getting a nice set of documents around, their legal agreements as well and stuff like that. So like there's a ton of stuff you can do. Do you ever have a fear that like, as you guys grow, or do you have a strategy for how you might manage this? Or have you given it any thought around, like, as you guys grow, you had employee number 50, you're now not able to be in those Tuesday meetings, right? Like, how do you replace yourself from a product perspective? Like, does that mean you have to go find another lawyer? Is it a product owner who you think can spend enough time with you that they learn it? Have you given that any thought? Which is a little unfair. I know you're not there yet, but
no, we've given it a lot of thought. So it's the fact that I'm a lawyer that also has an engineering background, like you said, is makes it it's a unique combination of skills, but at its very core, what we do is not that complicated. It's not, you don't need, in fact, sorry to any lawyers listening to this, but there's not a lot of magic to what any lawyers do. Now, there's the more experienced you are, right? The better you are at practicing law and giving advice and all that. But what we do is, it's not that complicated. I would say probably, the person on the planet that knows next to me that knows the most about the legal side of what we do is my co-founder, Eric Prue, and doesn't have a law degree, right? He's a product guy. So we really try to educate everybody on that part of what we do. And that's by breaking it down and saying, look, let's just think about the basic things that you think about when you're talking about a contract and signing a contract and keeping a copy of it. Concepts that are pretty easy for most people to comprehend. And when you get into the case law stuff and everything, and the fact that when we're selling at the enterprise level, we're typically dealing with in-house legal departments. It's not necessarily the product side that means that necessitates us to have that legal acumen. It's more of in the sales process being able to deal with those legal personas. So how do we do that? We hire lawyers. We only have one other lawyer on the team right now, but it will be a part of how we grow forever. Hiring, lawyers that want to sell, lawyers that want to be, we have a role in PactSafe called Legal Solutions Consulting, and then we will have, and this is a near-term roadmap hire for us, is a role called Product Counsel that will eventually replace me in some of those product meetings. I'll probably want to be involved in those indefinitely in some shape, form, or fashion, even when we're 100 employees. But yeah, there's two sides to that. There's a lot of what I do that does not need to be a lawyer, but it's also, it's a good skill to have, but it's teachable to anybody that's not a lawyer, I think.
So switch gears to the other side of the product where you have more established competition and you have to think through either chasing competitors or at least differentiating from competitors. Walk me through, to whatever extent you can, how often do you guys take a look at the market? Who's doing new things? Do you have any structured way that you capture that when you do that? And how, can you walk through a little bit of that process?
So sure. Right now, we don't really proactively go out and look and see what competitors are doing. We don't have some master inventory of all their features and what they do, but we do come across and get competitive questions in our sales process all the time. So to the extent that happens, we try to stay up to speed on how they're pricing things. Also, as part of that process, it becomes pretty obvious how we're different. And it comes out very early in our sales process as well, where most of our competitors, where it comes up all the time is, well, how are you different than DocuSign or Adobe or all these e-signature providers?
Yeah.
And, that's a very insignificant, small portion of what we do. You can do it in PactSafe. You can put a squiggly line on a PDF, and that's a great way to do it if that's how you want to do it. But that's not our business model. So when those discussions come up, we focus on, well, what are the points and spots in your business where you're engaging people, where we might be able to introduce like a significantly increase or create a significant increase in velocity around getting something reviewed and signed, almost to the extent that it becomes self-service and fully automated, which is something that's very difficult to do with electronic signatures. So a lot of times...
Can you make that tangible for me? What does that look like? Do you have an example?
Yeah. So the example I brought up before, NDAs. There's NDAs incredibly are this huge problem for big companies where it's, they have a bunch of different Word docs that are floating around, and salespeople and all these other people are just sending them out ad hoc, and they typically won't get countersigned, and they'll just get stuck in an inbox.
I've signed 3 NDAs with one of our clients.
Yeah. I mean,
nobody knows.
It's a nightmare.
Yeah.
And so we have some global companies that have consolidated and centralized their entire NDA process with PactSafe, where, you go, if it's Acme Widget Corp, you go to acmewidgetcorp.com/NDA, and there's an NDA right there. And it's a signing method that we have called Smart Packs, where you import your document in there. You can do all sorts of stuff with it. You hit publish, and it's this, a nice little branded page where now you just click accept and you've signed an NDA. And then all that stuff goes back to the same centralized spot. And if they want to drop it into another business system, they can. But, and then, the other example that I already gave was injecting, the process of accepting a contract into a phone call, right? So sending out a text message while you're on the phone with somebody, and they can just type, I agree in response. Or automating that process. If the primary way that you interact with your customers is, via mobile, like how can we make the signing experience, acceptance experience as high velocity and seamless to like that point of engagement, which is really all a click-through agreement on any website is, right?
Right. Keep going. If there's anything else on any kind of regular practices you guys might have about scoping out that competition outside of the sales cycle?
Not really. I mean, okay. So but we do that on purpose, though. I think it's, if we're paying too much attention to how our competition is solving problems, then maybe we're not listening to our customers enough. I mean, really, we want to solve problems for them really without regard to how somebody else is doing it. And, our bottoms up approach to, contracts and how contracts are signed is so, at least we think it is, and we try to ensure that it remains fundamentally different from everybody else. I mean, we are API first, which is different. And when you start looking at what competitors are doing and try to craft your value proposition and your roadmap and all that around them, then I think you run the risk of losing sight of what really matters. And that's, what do your customers need? What are they going to buy from you? How can you help them? And we want to help them in ways that nobody else can, which has benefited us as a business to date. And so, we've made a decision. We're aware, but it's not, has very little to do with the beginning of our sales process, our roadmap, or anything like that. It's, we pay attention to it to the extent that we need to be educated about it when it comes up in a question during a sales process. And, frankly, we coexist with a lot of those competitors inside of all of our big customers.
Right. Do you have a feel for what percentage of your product roadmap is influenced by conversations in the sales cycle versus conversations with existing customers? I'm trying to get out there, like, how much are you responding to what your best or most common customers are asking you for versus what you're hearing might be missing?
Yeah, I would say probably very little on the prospect side, unless it's we've built things for some customers if we think that it's not a one-off use case,
Yeah.
and or it's a really big customer. But for the most part, we try to not let that influence our roadmap. So it probably doesn't even compare. I would say the rest of our roadmap is probably 50-50 innovating ahead of the market, 50%, listening and keeping customers happy and building what they need and want.
How do you solicit that feedback from customers?
Sometimes they just come right out and give it. And then our customer success team has regular touch points with our entire customer base. And those touch points vary from emails to surveys to chats to, annual meetings and reviews to quarterly reviews. Just, it depends on size of the customer, use case and all that. But yeah, that's one of the more important aspects of that customer success role is, constantly soliciting customer feedback, good or bad.
Where do they, just tools and tactics real quick, where do they capture that when they get that? So if I go out, I'm one of your account managers, I go do an account review with a client, they give me a couple of points of feedback. When I come back to the office, where am I putting that?
So we Salesforce and Quip.
Okay.
So we've developed a pretty healthy usage of Quip, which is a Salesforce company. So I guess it's all Salesforce, but
yeah,
it all goes in there. Salesforce is our source of truth. And then from there, it'll matriculate its way, into product, into an upsell, into whatever.
Okay. Got it. As you look out, if you can share this, be interesting. As you look out maybe 5-ish years in the future, where do you think the platform has gone? Do you think it's more of the same? Do you think you've added any new innovative features that you guys are kind of envisioning right now? What's next?
Yeah, if you think about the overall life cycle of a contract, there's all sorts of different phases in that life cycle, and we sit, in the execution phase right now. And so for the immediate term, that's where we're going to stay. And it's interesting being in that portion of the contract life cycle because it's the part that every single business and really individual on the planet can understands and has experience with.
Right.
So we're there for now, but where we'll probably start to expand is working our way out both, post-contract signing and pre-contract signing to different parts of that life cycle. So getting into, on the contract management side, understanding, what contracts you have out there. And you can do some of this stuff with PactSafe right now. But, getting real analytical about when contracts expire, looking at risk profiles, filtered down by what people have purchased on a website, over the course of, 5 million purchases over the past 3 months or whatever. And the reason we have that sort of opportunity is to do what we do at scale, we had to take a very, very data-driven approach to contract execution, where everything to us is it sits in one of two buckets. It's either legal content, which is just a collection of words and phrases and periods and stuff. And then you have legal events that are happening over time in correlation to that bucket of legal content. And
give me an example of a legal event.
Signature, accept,
okay, sign,
reject, consent, revoke consent, viewed, all those different things.
Okay, thanks.
And so it's a little bit different approach that is simple to describe, but has pretty profound implications on what you can do when you have, that ending data set, where it's all of it. A signed contract to us is just a structured collection of data and information. So you think about all the different things that you can do with the rest of the contract life cycle because of that. And we had to take that approach because when you're doing something at that scale, And someday, we could be doing billions of agreements a week if you're doing, really, really massive scale global stuff. You can't look at the world as files and documents and things that are bulky and structured. It has to be just data. So sometimes using PactSafe, it won't feel like that. It'll feel very much like, hey, this is a contract, but in its guts, that's what it is. It's two buckets of content and legal events.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing you talk about that. I'm reflecting on, I do a lot of the contract stuff for us at Developer Town, right? I'm our armchair quarterback legal team. And I'm thinking through one of the two common scenarios that come up for me are we'll agree to a contract with a client where in my head, I know what I've agreed to will allow us to do a certain type of work, but won't allow us to do, I'm sure they'd be more than happy that we do the other work, but I've not, the terms that we got would prevent us from doing a different kind of work, right? So for example, maybe we can do design work under that contract, but I'm uncomfortable with the IP language for us to go forward and do development work, right? Mm-hmm. Now I know that, and I might tell the sales team, you can sell design work here, but we can't do development work until we get another MSA in place or revisions to this one in place, right? But that nuance gets lost after I say it. After I say that, that's it. That's the only place it is. Now it's in my head and your head, and that's in nobody else's. So if you leave and somebody else takes over your account 2 years from now, and I don't catch it at the time, because for any number of reasons, right? Then suddenly we're doing work that we never necessarily signed up to do, or at least didn't think we were doing when we agreed to those terms, right? So that's super interesting that you might be able to, after the fact, have a radar that can show you where a risk, where a certain type of risk is and how that could influence decisions down the road. Did I kind of catch that right? Is that?
Yeah, you did. Yeah. And it's so there's quite a few product contract lifecycle management, contract management products out there that do that now, but it's very manual, data entry driven. Hey, we'll create an alert here and there. It's difficult to do at scale, and it's difficult to automate. Now, that's where some AI comes in. So there's plenty of players out there that are trying to do that.
Right.
But as a backward looking kind of remedial thing, it's hasn't been very successful, because even when you're dropping 1,000 PDFs into OCR and then running them through AI, somebody still has to go and check that stuff.
Right.
Whereas if your starting point is structured data that's been tagged and structured the right way, then there's a lot less manual process that goes into getting, actionable insights and analytics out of that stuff that can influence decision making down the road.
Yeah, that's the other thing, that the second piece that was occurring to me was just that, we've signed, I don't even know anymore, right? 350 MSAs on our side, which each have their own insurance requirements, just basic liability insurance, right? Errors and omissions, all that crap. And I just think, how baller would it be if every year when we go to renew our insurance policy, I could just print out a report that just says, look, this is what you've agreed to.
Yep.
And if you want no risk, this is what you should go buy. And if you're okay with a little bit of risk, this is what you should go buy. And if you're okay with a lot of risk, this is what you should go buy, right?
Yep.
Even something that simple, that's look, this is it, right? Now you can make the decision. What I have to do every year is go pick who I think are probably our most representative contracts that we've signed, or maybe the scariest ones. I look at those and I'm okay, yeah, we're probably okay, or we need to up this or that, right?
Yeah.
But it's all heuristic. It's just in my head, right?
Yep.
Again, if I'm not here, I can only imagine on a team of any size where it's not all going through one person. It's got to be insane, right?
Yep.
How do you do that when you have 5 lawyers?
Yeah. So from there, what we will figure out are those things that we build, or do we just integrate into the rest of the contract ecosystem? And because it's a nice way to grow if you have logical channels to build into like that. But that's kind of where things will go once if we move outside of just straight up seamless contract execution at scale. We would probably start tackling other parts of the contract lifecycle. So it's the logical step, but it's just which one first and Do we build it, or do we integrate, or do we do both?
Awesome. If people want to learn more about PactSafe, if they want to get connected with you, ask any questions, where can they do that?
They can go right to PactSafe.com, PactSafe.com.
Hey, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
If you're thinking of launching a SaaS product, Startup Competitors can provide data on your closest competitors, survey potential users, or provide other product validation services. Learn more at startupcompetitors.com.